All right, so we are live on our third webinar. This is an opportunity for us to kind of talk a little bit about the things that are going on in people in the midst of this coronavirus crisis season that we're in. That's unprecedented, things we've never done before. So week one, we talked about financial realities. Last week, we had this cool opportunity to have a set of 3 different nurses from 3 different environments talk about the reality of what they're experiencing on the front lines and dealing with all the healthcare dynamics in the hospital context. So last week, in a sense, we focused on the what's going on externally, what's going on with people that are affected health-wise, and so this week, what we're doing is we're kind of shifting to the internal and recognizing that that some people are going to the hospital, some people are getting sick with the virus, but everybody is being affected directly or indirectly. Or actually, no, everyone's being affected directly by what's going on around them. Emotionally, spiritually, et cetera. And so I felt like it was a perfect opportunity to talk through what that looks like with some folks that deal with people's hearts and with the mental health dynamics that come with a situation like this. So I got 3 awesome people that are fantastic. I'm super excited about being able to be together with you guys tonight and to talk through these pieces. So let me give you each a chance to kind of introduce yourselves. And I'm just going to go from top left to bottom right. So Nate, Libby, and then Kendall. Just kind of give us a little info about yourself, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. Nate.
Yep, I'm Nathan Shattuck. I'm with Soul Care Christian Counseling. Founded it about 15 years ago. Married, 2 kids. One's 14, one's 9, both boys. And I do most of my counseling with individual men struggling in all kinds of different areas of sexual brokenness, and then marriages that are working through affair recovery, or just some kind of significant betrayal or crisis, and a mix of that. And we have office in Roswell and also in Dunwoody, Sandy Springs area. So
cool. Excited to have you, Nate. Libby.
All right, I'm Libby Chalk. I started my work. I got a degree in marriage and family therapy, and then worked in agencies for a while, and eventually ended up in private practice. Currently, though, I'm at home. I've got 4 kids, and we hybrid school. So when we made the decision to do hybrid school, that was also a decision for me to take a break from work for a little bit. My oldest is 9. My youngest is 9 months. And I do occasionally do volunteer work and contract work. My most recent work was with postpartum depression and women who are at risk in that population. But I also spent a lot of time working with teens and families, and also many women's issues.
Awesome. Libby, I'm so glad you're with us tonight. Kendall, what about you?
Yeah, I'm Kendall Flo. I am a licensed professional counselor. I am the clinical director at Hidden River Counseling in Roswell, and there's a group of us here that I have the pleasure of leading, of therapists that see anything from. We do a ton of trauma work, a ton of sexual addiction, sexual brokenness work, a fair amount of families and teens as well, a lot of depression and anxiety. And I am here local in Roswell, married with 2 boys. One, my oldest is 4.5, and my youngest is 1.5.
All right. So you're all quarantined with kids. That's terrific. Well, and before we jump into some of the first questions, I just want to remind those of you who have the attendees that have arrived lately here, if you want to ask a question, or if there's something you have on your mind related to mental health, stress, anxiety, depression, uncertainty, how to talk to kids, any of that stuff, you can drop your questions down in the Q&A section. So you just drop to the bottom of the Zoom piece there and drop some Q&A. We already have some questions that have started rolling in. And as I predicted, there would be one early from Morgan Chalk. Thank you, Morgan. And it's the answer to that question. Let's just start with that. Why am I so rude to you? Is because I love you the most. That is my answer. So Okay, well, I thought I'd go ahead and just kick off with kind of a pseudo general question based on what you guys are seeing and experiencing kind of currently in your context. And so the question is basically kind of what's the one thing that you're hearing or that you're dealing with kind of from a mental health standpoint with folks during this time, during this crisis, with your clients, whether it's friends, family, or clients? What are you hearing or dealing with the most currently? What's one particular thing? And you guys can go first. Oh, Ken, why don't you fire out first? What are you seeing the
Sure.
most?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm seeing more of a sense of purposelessness from people. We're all being asked to run a marathon with no designated end, and I think that over the course, sustained for a significant amount of time, leaves people with a sense of what am I doing? What am I? It creates a sense of wanting to kind of shut in on themselves and isolate themselves, having come from places of feeling alive and purposeful in the life pre-COVID-19. People seem to be really struggling with what is my purpose right now as I live. How long is this going to last? Do I just live with no purpose right now? It's really distressing for people.
So purposelessness and that's new because of what in particular do you sense is actually contributing to that in light of this?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think because people don't have a sense of like what we're working towards, like there's not a third, this could end at the end of April, it may not, and so people are losing a sense of. Some people I'm seeing lose heart in this place, and with that goes the purpose that they felt within the context of parenting and their profession, and even within the context of faith as well.
Interesting. Okay. What about you, Libby? What are you hearing? What are you sensing?
I think just very tangible losses everywhere for everyone. I think a very specific example that I just heard today was someone who is used to doing family relationships very closely with her parents and having their parents see grandkids all the time and interact with family all the time, all of a sudden is missing major milestones and missing birthdays. And she was saying, her mother was just in tears over missing a milestone. And so just these very, very tangible losses.
Yeah.
And people not knowing what to do with those necessarily, like looking at the loss and then not knowing what to do with it. Are you going to stuff it? Are you going to brush it under the rug? Are you going to medicate it away? Just loss everywhere, and people uncertain with how to handle that loss.
Okay. I think that'd be something worth maybe coming back to. I'd be curious if the attendees, if y'all have any questions around that arena of loss. But Nate, what about you? So loss of purposelessness, loss. What about you, Nate?
I would probably classify it or just label it like just a significant disorientation. I think I think every human being is pretty neurotic. We're able to keep that at bay a good bit most of the time, even out of our awareness. But the ability to just keep that at bay and have it be just a low level guilt or sadness or comparison to others or shame, all that anger, like it's just this disorientation. It just seems to have really poured gas on all that stuff that's usually pretty low level and just taken it to a really high level. And because this isn't, bombs falling on us or a famine or, the kind of things that you would see in a catastrophe movie. And yet it has aspects of that, but it's not across the board and not, a Michael Bay movie, like stuff blowing up everywhere. it just feels like, can I give myself permit? Like, why am I struggling like this? Why am I this neurotic? Why am I this sad? Why am I this angry? Why am I picking these battles online with people? Like, what is, and so just a lot of impatience with themselves, ourselves, myself. So that
It's like kind of a version of like Pandora's box has been opened, but no one knows what box it is, and it's like it's quiet. And it's not like we all knew it happened. It's not bombs dropping.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like showing. You're saying it's just showing up across the board, but not.
Yeah, and like I don't think we realize. I didn't really until I studied it that like our brain works to like kind of automate as much as it possibly can. You think about how often like you drove home from work or school or something and you have no recollection of having made any decision along that way. Right. You put your pants on and you didn't have to like ponderously think about, okay, I stick my leg in this side and then and so much of life, our brain has created these scripts to just have everything that can be automated gets automated. So our focus and energy and processing power can be applied to things that are new and different. And then suddenly everything that we had automated has been thrown up and you just have a lot less processing power. You have, these crazy programs going off haywire and it's like, what in the world is going on? But it's just a result of so many things that are normally just humming along. You're not even aware of them. That's the entire reason and purpose of the brain functioning that way. So you don't have to be aware of it. But now you're aware of everything all at the same time. And almost nothing feels automated because everything's new. And so it's just a lot more stressful than it looks like.
To that end, there's actually a good question that popped up here that I think kind of I'd be curious about in light of what you guys all three just shared, how you guys would kind of talk through a little bit of this. I know some people are enjoying their time at home, but I feel more frustrated and seem to get angry quickly with everyone around me. I'm wondering what's wrong with me.
Sure.
So let's talk about that a little bit. What does that elicit in you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all walking around with shorter fuses because we're spending, like Nate was talking about, so much of our capacity is being spent on the environment we're living in. And I tend to look at, it's a lot of what I'm seeing is people having, big blow-ups in marriage that are uncharacteristic and not even about anything. It's just random. It's almost like fits of anger that at their kids or at their spouses or at themselves. And ultimately, I look at anger as it's like it's your brain trying to find some sense of control, right? Trying to force your way into a space of feeling more in control. Of course, it does more damage and really requires us to increase our self-awareness of the kind of care that we need, because all of us must increase our self-care in this space because we're spending so much more just living in the society we're living in right now.
Yeah, I think this obviously what we're experiencing now is a trauma, and anyone who experiences a trauma, a way of understanding it is too much too fast. And this change was really pretty rapid for us. And it's going to take a while to adjust, but the process of adjusting is an emotional one too. It's moving through the feelings of exhaustion and overwhelmed and uncertainty and going through all that negative to get to the other side. But it is a process. You have to go through the hard.
Other side, though. You're saying there's another side, so there is hope. So okay, but let's talk about process on that, because I think that's something that people struggle with, right? We like slide my credit card, get me to the other side, right? I just want to buy the ticket to the other side. So talk about process on that. You mentioned three things. Can you repeat those? And so how do you navigate through that? And then what does the other side start looking like? Maybe that would help.
Well, I mentioned, just feelings of exhaustion, being overwhelmed on an emotional roller coaster. And I think the concept with any hard emotion is you can't go around it. You have to go through it. Like you're going on a bear hunt, with kids. Um, you have to take the time to look at the losses, the grief that you're experiencing because of this, to take a minute in a journal or with a trusted friend or a partner in your home or whatever, to take that minute and let them know it's been a rough day because of XYZ. I was expecting to go to a birthday party, or we were supposed to meet up with these friends I hadn't seen in a while. Little things like that have bigger emotions attached to them than we would often like to admit. And even just the big emotions that come with adjusting to change. So I think the first step is to acknowledge that it's hard, and to actually say those words out loud or to write them down, to get it into reality, out of your body a little bit, can be very powerful in naming things and naming emotions that go with them. So because I'm a therapist, we keep one of these feeling sheets in our home. It's on our refrigerator. And I keep that for my kids, but I keep it for me too. So that when things feel frustrating, we have lots of words to go to for, I'm not just frustrated, I'm feeling like you abandoned me. So it's good to have a good feeling word vocabulary at this time, because your emotions are all over the place. So that's where I would start. Step one, identify what's the emotion that's driving you today.
And then I'd say step two is letting somebody else into that space, right? Connecting in that space. Emotional awareness and connection are enormous in this space, I think.
Yeah, kind of maybe connected to this. One of these questions of this situation, one of the questions is, this situation has caused old griefs to flare up, or rather learning to grieve old losses in a new way. It's causing anxiety. Any thoughts on that? Just maybe having, I don't know if it's because of having space to actually deal.
Yeah, and I think that this is, Nate, you and I have talked about this before, even with some of your training stuff that you did at ISF, of like 3 weeks in the wilderness by yourself. Like, we're not 3 weeks in the wilderness by ourselves right now, but it's some of the similar effects of so much distraction and so much that, because no one's putting anything on our calendar, no one's putting anything. It's like what's going to bubble up, and I'm also seeing as well in myself, also like things that I've neglected to talk through or to work through are bubbling up because I have more space and time. It's isolation, and in that space, more grief a lot of grief, I think, is going to come up in this space, because that's, I think, most often what we defer, push to the back burner as human beings, because it's some of the stuff that it hurts, and it doesn't. And right now, a lot of the unfinished hurt in our life, and it is, as much as this doesn't sound like a lot of fun, it is a blessing, I think, in that space, because I've told a lot of clients and myself, like, you won't get this much space ever in your life again. I don't think, like, you may never have this space again. And I'm telling myself that too, because I, from day to day, hate it, or, I'm learning to appreciate it. It's very, very difficult for me, but man, to lean into the space, and you're not crazy that you're experiencing unfinished hurt coming to the surface. You just simply have more stillness in your life right now than you normally do.
Is it fair to say? Is it fair to say then that based on you hearing, like, if you're feeling grief, it's probably normal. If you're feeling anxiety, it's probably normal. If you're feeling, I mean, is that a fair? It's like, it's not a time like this. I mean, you guys deal with trauma and stuff all the time, right? Marriages falling apart, people like. So you're used to having people walk in with like, "Hey, my world blew up in some way, shape, or form," or "I feel like it's falling apart." Either way, right? And so, like, there's a normalcy to that but it's not normal for everybody to be going through that at the same time. So I think, is there a sense of, I mean, I imagine, right? I mean, that you have an opportunity to do. So what would you say to, like, if you could, like, speak to America for a minute in a sense and be like, hey, it's normal to what would you say? Like, what would that be? What would that declaration be? Nate, what are your thoughts? What would
I mean, as we're talking, I'm thinking about, there's some people that have a lot less space all of a sudden.
Mhm.
The kids are home all day, and the parents have to be involved in their schooling a lot more, hold their hand through, and they have to somehow do their job at the same time, and their boss or clients are like, and then there's some people that just have a ton more space, which can be disquieting. You would, for a little bit, it's like, oh, this is sweet. It's like a long weekend. And then it's like, oh crap, like what's all this stuff coming up, and it's like, no, and you didn't even know it was there. And so, I mean, I just keep thinking of one of my main professors in grad school, Dr. John Coe, and he would, tongue in cheek sing the Beatles, just let it be. Let it be. Like it is. Let it be. And it's the force that we try to apply to what we think ought to be, what feels good, and that does so much damage. Now, it's not saying like, well, just whatever I feel, I'm just gonna let it guide my decisions and what I say to my children or my spouse or myself. Like, no, but like Libby was saying, like, talk about it, externalize it, get it outside of just ruminating and just blowing up, and take this time to, okay, so something's here. I'm going to explore with another person. I'm going to be vulnerable and transparent and share with somebody, hey, this is happening and it's so weird. I keep thinking about something that I've not thought about for years, and it nothing about this seems to have triggered it, but it keeps coming up. Or I'm angry all the time, or like I'm having the hardest time getting out of bed, like, and just talk to somebody else and bring somebody else in on that. Maybe a therapist, but maybe it's your best friend, your sister, your brother, like whoever. And so just steward whatever it is that is coming up with being curious about, like, what is that telling me about what's going on inside of me?
And that could, as you say, that could be boredom, or it could be anxiety because you're overwhelmed, right? It could be either. That would be the two. I mean, talk about that spectrum. That's kind of the spectrum you're talking about. You got people that are like, yeah, it's pretty quiet right now, or oh my gosh, my life just blew up. Everything is crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Losing, a new space. So, but either way, stuff is coming up, right? And that's what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in that boredom piece, I had a specific story that's relevant. There is I had a client who was experiencing extreme boredom, and normally within the context of boredom, that doesn't last long. Normally, right? We find a way, right? But when you're sequestered in a house with a group of people, whatever, it really is sustained. And as we pressed into it, it was the boredom actually broke her to a place of recognizing some significant spaces of rejection that she feels in her family, right? And so, but the boredom is what, like sustained boredom is what brought that out, right? And so it's there's so much to lean into here that we so often distract ourselves from.
You were just saying, what would you want everyone to hear? I think what I would want everyone to hear is that this is a collective trauma that we are going through. And that is a huge reason in and of itself to be very, very gentle with yourself and with the people that you're living with.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe with people that you're not living with too.
Like, yeah.
This is experiencing boredom, good grief, and the other person's experiencing high stress. Like, it's like, but who's wrong? Right? Who's right? So who's doing this right? Yeah, that's great.
I mean, one practical thing I would say is, like, resist as much as you can the temptation to come to conclusions and make big decisions about, like, when this is over, like, I'm getting out of, I'm getting a divorce, or I'm quitting this job, or what, like, this is so intense and disorienting. Now, there may be good, I think there's going to be a lot of good revelations that come out of it, and self-discovery, and and hopefully, realizations about grieving that needs to happen, and wounds that were there that we thought were just behind us, and maybe even hopefully the discovery of new desires and dreams and gifting and passions. Like, yeah, I hope there's all kinds of that comes out of it. But I definitely would let the dust settle before any significant decisions get made, and see what remains outside of this crisis.
Okay. I'm going to shift the direction. It's a real practical question here. My spouse is dealing with a lot of anxiety and worried about getting the disease, about getting corona. I am the opposite. How do I help without being dismissive? I think it's a very, so this is, you gotta earn your credentials tonight. Right. This would be true in a lot of contexts, but this is a very specific thing, right? You're stuck together in a household, so you see the context. So what's some just good counsel you would give in this moment? Go ahead and be dismissive. Is that the option? I think it's always.
So it's difficult. I think that space, understanding anxiety. I've experienced anxiety myself more recently for the first time in my life. So I would speak on an even more vulnerable space. I think it's like real anxiety is torturous, and it's it's a sense of feeling so out of control and so afraid, and there's nothing worse in that space than feeling alone, because ultimately that's what anxiety is no one would understand, no one will really be here with me in this space. And some of the spaces, shout out to my wife, that have been really, really meaningful are simply her reaching over and making physical contact with me, grabbing my hand and saying, I'm here, like, I'm right here, right? And that's a really, really special space within the context of anxiety. Like, you are not alone, right? You are not alone.
That's cool. That's really powerful.
I think there's a fear with anxiety that it's going to eat you up.
Yeah.
And this feeling that it is eating you from the inside. Yep. And I'm speaking from personal experience too. And I think it can be extremely powerful, like Kendall said, to have another person who can hold that with you, and it doesn't feel like it's going to eat you. If there's someone else sitting there, holding that space with you and holding that difficult emotion with you and staying connected, like Kendall said, through touch or through really good eye contact or really good listening. And by really good listening, I mean that you're tracking along, you're not on your phone, you are reflecting some of the things that they're saying and affirming some of the things of, I can see why you would feel that way. You're not crazy. We have to be able to hold that space for difficult emotions right now because they're popping out all over the place. So maybe your spouse feels anxiety more, feels that negative emotion more. Maybe you feel anger more, or maybe you feel another, maybe it's resignation or apathy more. But we all have a negative emotion coming to the surface right now. It just happens to be that your spouse's is anxiety. And I think it can be very powerful for your relationship in the long run if you can learn to come together in the heaviness and the difficulty of a negative emotion, and hold it together.
Okay,
that's awesome. Thanks.
One thing I would just add on that is, there's times where anxiety is just, it's overpowering. It fills up the whole windshield of your attention, your mind, even physiologically. But then there's usually times where that lessens a bit, and I have a little bit, it may even feel like temporary sanity, and I just have some clarity about what the, like the coronavirus, and what the likelihood that I'm going to get it, or um, what the likelihood of what will happen even if I do, and I can see that within the overall context. And it's been helpful to me and for a number of people that I know and have worked with to take those moments where there is clarity and groundedness, and knowing even that it's not going to stay for good, which is, I think, something we just have to admit to ourselves sometimes. I'm going to go back into where the anxiety and the fear just fills back up almost everything. But trying to capture that grounding truth in writing, and communicate it to myself, to that self that I know is going to lose touch with that and not have as much clarity and all that, communicate in a way that only I can communicate to me what I knew. It's that whole thing, like, don't doubt in the darkness what you knew in the light, what you saw in the light. And so it's almost like trying to capture what I saw in moments where the anxiety wasn't so overwhelming. Now, when we have that little bit of space, you just want to, like, oh, thank goodness. Oh man. And you just want to chill. But to take a little bit of that space and try to capture why it wasn't as overwhelming, what you could see, what was weighted differently. And then when you're no longer there, to go back and really try to sit with that. And if you're a Christian, to just ask God to okay, help me remember why I was calmed by this, why I was at rest with this. I don't feel that now, but I trust this because I knew this to be true at the time. And I think that can really take some of the peaks of the anxiety and just lessen them a little bit. Um,
So both the sense of there's some like some self-care dynamics as well as some of the mutual care. You're
mhm,
talking about some handles there. Um,
mhm.
hang on to. Well, I want to shift over. There's a couple of questions related to kids in particular, so I want to hit there. There's some questions about work that I want to get to in a minute too. But the one of the things, as a parent, I'm not exactly sure how to talk to my kids about COVID. What's too much? I'm worried about it, but I don't want to. How do I? I don't want to say. I don't want them to see my anxiety. So what does that look like? And of course, children have a span, right? So probably not the same with a 2-year-old as with a 15-year-old, but what does that look like? How do you parent in this time in a way that what are some guardrails or directions you get? How do you help your kids through this time? Libby, why don't you start with this?
All right.
Mhm.
I think it's important to know that no matter how old your kids are at this point, with the exception of babies and toddlers, this is in the air. They know. They are probably much more aware than you would give them credit for, especially because they were in school for a while and kids were talking about it at school. For example, my son came home one day and had a nightmare because another kid had told him about this virus that was going to kill him while he was sleeping. So, I mean, kids are hearing all kinds of things that you don't have control over now that they're home, where you have a little bit more control. So I say that to give you freedom. It's not like when you say there's a virus that we don't know a lot about and we're all still learning, and it makes me feel afraid. That should feel right to them. They can identify with that. That should feel normalizing and affirming that they're not crazy. Again, I know this will come up again later, but what you don't want to do is have the news on 24 hours a day. You don't want to give them access to, all social media and all of the information coming in at you that way, assaulting you basically that way. You want to have control over the information that they're given. So I think creating an atmosphere of normalizing anxiety and fear, and just saying everybody feels afraid. Mommy feels afraid, daddy feels afraid. We don't know what's going to happen. A conversation I've had with my kids has been saying, we're taking this 1 week at a time, and sort of on a basis of every week, we get a little bit more information about how the next week is going to go. And so the scientists and the politicians are getting together every week and making decisions, and then they let us know what's going to happen. So it's okay for us to feel afraid, but to also feel hopeful at the same time. We can feel something really bad and something really good at the same time. We don't have to be swallowed up by our fear. We can also hold hope at the same time that things will get better and we will see the end of this. So I think it's important to include both pieces of that for the sake of resilience. If you have a child who's particularly anxious, there are some great kids books on anxiety, and I can name some of those at some point if somebody wants me to. Also some great, if your kid gets nervous at bedtime, there's some great kids meditations that can help kids settle into sleep a little more peacefully with guided meditation and relaxation. So it shouldn't be a taboo topic in your home. It should be a very open topic. There shouldn't be any invalidating or minimizing when they're talking about their fears or what they've heard or their misconceptions. With my oldest son, one of his teachers suggested he start a quarantine journal. And so he has done that. And it's been interesting for me he said I could read it. And it's been interesting for me to see how he processes things. And the journal kind of transformed into a comic book, which was him versus the virus, which I thought was him, working out how he feels about the virus. He's mad about it. It's taken away his play dates. It's taken away sports and things that he loves. And so this is his way of feeling mad about it. So that's how his feelings are coming out. My 6-year-old's a different story. He feels more worried about it, more anxious about it. And so he's capable of writing a little bit, but we usually do a check-in just a couple times a week at bedtime or during the day sometime. We say prayers at bedtime. And so sometimes we'll pray about something that he's worried about or something he's sad about missing or something he's hopeful that he's still going to get to do. And we talk a lot in our family about holding things with an open hand, that we don't know what today holds. We don't know what tomorrow holds, but that's no reason to not have hope, that there's still gifts in every moment of every day if we just look around for them. So those are the conversations around our house.
So definitely the dialogue sounds like the key piece too. I mean, you're talking about it on a regular basis, which
It's huge. Normalizing.
The normalizing word of, it's in the air anyway. I think it's a misconception. It sounds like to think that you can pretend like it's not happening or hide it from. Anything to add from you guys? Just even maybe a different age group dynamic. I mean, if you got teenagers potentially. I know we got some folks that have teenagers that,
Yeah, I mean, I'd say even I have younger kids, and from kind of a neurological development and attachment perspective, I love what you're saying, Libby, about hope, because if we lead, we got to find a balance. I think if we lead with anything close to panic with our little kids, especially because as parents, for little kids, we are their certainty, right? And for them, neurologically speaking. And if we lead with panic, after this is over, our children are going to have a very difficult time trusting their environment after this comes to an end. And so but at the same point, I think it's regardless of how old our kids, it's very important for them to see us struggle emotionally, right? But there's a difference between allowing them into our fear and our uncertainty and allowing them into the moments of panic that we have, right? Very, very different. But that balance, I think, is really, really important on an attachment and neurological level, especially when you consider when this is over, the adjustment back to whatever reality is after this.
Mm-hmm. All right, we got several other questions I want to get to, so I'm going to go ahead and keep moving through here. One people would like your feelings chart, Libby, so we'll make sure to get a hold of that. Post it along with this, so just know that there's people who have feelings who would like a chart. We're not sure they're not sure how they feel about it, is my guess, but I don't know how they feel about the chart. So thank you for asking about that. We'll make sure to get that, make that available. One question that I thought is I want to get to this one about the future in a minute. So I see you guys have liked that question, but let me go to hold on, let me find. Okay, I'm feeling demotivated to work from home. Are there any strategies to adjust to this new normal? Just some of the motivation dynamics at play here. Maybe if you can help at all, like what's maybe going on internally? What some of the things that fuel demotivation, or kind of what could be going on there that may be, and then what are some potential just kind of practical strategies. I know you guys are therapists, so we always come in. I know this because I was pastor people come in like, give me a strategy of how to fix this. It's like, well, there may be more going on. So I'm going to ask the question under the question is, are there some potential things that might be going on, and then what might be some strategies? So I'm going to add to the question. Anyone?
I would say, for me, in my experience, when you lose rhythm in your life, right, you're going to lose motivation in your life. And so every one of our rhythms have been challenged, if not completely discarded at this point, especially when you're working from home. You're used to a commute, you're used to some downtime left. You're also used to likely more sunshine. And so finding rhythms, creating a rhythm, it's real easy when you're working from home for everything to mesh together and not to have specific things on our calendar throughout the day that move us from one thing to the next. In addition to that, again, on a neurological level, get outside every day, rain or shine, get outside, get some exposure to the sun. It's going to do wonders for the sake of to your brain. And so I think those two things are what I'm pushing with people, creating more structure, because there is, every part of structure has been challenged now. And for a lot of us, depending on personality types, we need that to stay motivated.
And I want to add to that. Initially there were all these schedules going around, and people would say, from 9:15 to 10:15, my kids are going to do X, Y, and Z. And I laughed out loud when I saw that. So what Kendall said is absolutely true. You do need structure. If you have little kids in your home, you not need a schedule necessarily, but you need a routine. So yeah. I just want to differentiate those two. That
very different.
Yeah, there's got to be specs for you, but definitely have the safety net of a routine. When you're having a rough day and a struggle, okay, this is what comes next. And I think for working at home too, I think you were touching on this also, Kendall. The idea of getting your heart rate up for 20 minutes every day is so powerful. It is a literal brain bath as far as the neurotransmitters that you're activating, and the way that you're kind of resetting your brain for activity and energy and engaging and functioning. So if you can get your heart rate up 20 minutes a day, every day, that will be very powerful in your motivation.
Now, I know some people would say that just a bath would do that, wouldn't it?
No, brain bath.
Now, I can see somebody saying, like, man, if I'm having trouble with motivation with work, like I'm probably having trouble with motivation to go walk for 20 minutes every day, to put in structure, to go to bed at the same time and get up at the same time. And like the motivation for those things is going to be really difficult. And these are really important, good things that you may just have to, like by any means necessary, make yourself do for a few days, in trusting that the motivation for those and for work and for other things will grow as a result of the physiological, neurological changes that happen with that structure. But it may also be like, we all know that, like, whether it's going to the gym or all kinds of different habits that we know are good, we're so much better at it if we involve at least one other person
Yeah.
as a friend and a peer that's just going to support us. And we say, okay, this is what I'm trying to do. This is why I think I need to do it. Would you ask me about that tomorrow? If you're in a place where you can go exercise, like, can we go walk? We'll be, 6 feet or more away from each other, but we're going to meet up, and I'll be there. You know that I'm going to be there. I know that you're going to be there. And we can talk from 6-10 feet away, and even check in, like, hey, are you still up? I know it's almost, you said you wanted to be in bed by 10 or 11. Okay. That will just not only help you to accomplish that, but to not feel alone in everything else that's going on. And that is just hard to overstate how significant the withness of another person in what you're going through here is.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's interesting. The theme here is there's quite the connective theme of, if you're connected, whether it's in your own fear and anxiety and your boredom and your motivation, you're trying to connect with your kid. The idea of which is, of course, as we're disconnected and isolated, it's like that. Wow. Yeah, and I know that there's some, I know you guys we talked about, there's some people have had to figure out the working at home thing quite a bit. So I'm sure there's some good resources out there to that end from just a productivity standpoint. But I think that what you guys are hitting on is actually the interrelationality, which is super important to the kind of people we want to be. So that's awesome. One of the, okay, I'm going to try to make sure I hit on this. As an introvert, I sometimes feel stressed having to engage in online video group chats as extroverts do. How can I cope with this expectation? So this is kind of a unique COVID question. I thought this is a great question because it's like we're all living on Zoom suddenly, and the extroverts in the world are like, "This is great. We could just be in a room. This is fantastic." And then there's other people that known as introverts, I believe, that this is actually going to be stressful. So talk a little bit about that. How does one enter and engage in this kind of a context in a way that kind of cope with the expectations of being an extrovert when you're seeing yourself and you're aware of yourself in a way that you weren't aware of yourself in previous conversations? Any thoughts on that?
An introvert, you mean?
Yes. Yeah. If you're an introvert and you feel the expectation of being, or engaging in these kinds of online video groups, gatherings, community groups that are meeting online, meetings, that kind of thing.
I say wear sunglasses on a lot of those and just sit back and take a nap. Say you've got some eye thing going on.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had to talk with a number of people that they're recharging introversion time just disappeared, gone.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it was just there again. It's like those rhythms that we didn't know how much we knew we liked them. We didn't know how much we needed them just to function normally. And so they're having to be really intentional and ask the people around them to make space for that I have to create this time. And one of the guys that I was counseling talking about this is African-American guy. And I realized like that extroverts, I'm an extrovert, not nearly as extreme extrovert as I used to be, but I'm an extrovert, and we're really absolutely the dominant culture in every country in the history of the world that I can imagine. Like, it's ruled and determined by extroverts, and that becomes kind of the standard. And it's like, being extroverted is not better to one tiny little bit than being introverted. But because, and for this guy, like, he understood that dominant culture thing because he knows that like white people are the dominant culture here. And that for me as a white person, I need help realizing that my experience is not the same one that he is having as an African-American man. and that my experience as a man is not the same that a woman that Libby is having. And so I was encouraging him, like, you're probably going to have to tell your extroverted wife, like, hey, like, I'm not like you. This has actually impacted me as an introvert very significantly. And can you help me think about what are ways that we together can try to make some space for that? Because I'm feeling the need for it, maybe more than I ever have before. And it's not organically there. So, what's the best way that I can do that costs you the least,
Right.
And she was probably going to be like, oh, wow, I didn't even, I can see that's really significant. Yeah, we need to carve out some space, but it just had not even dawned on her because it's not her experience.
Question, and that's obviously fantastic from a friendship, close relationships, etc. From a kind of like how your experience in the world. I think some of the questions here is around the idea of like, here I am thrust into a group. Like imagine if the four of us are talking. If there's 8 of us, and Libby the introvert is like, what? I don't, all these extroverts on this call. Like I think that's the question. A little bit,
Mhm.
like how does that, as you said, if it's dominated by the extrovert world, what does an introvert enter into that context with? Because I think that's we're not going to do less Zoom calls in the future, right? I don't think that we're heading towards that. I think one of the things we're learning is we're going to be doing more of these kinds of opportunities, and what does it look like to do so? The intentionality is pretty cool. So, any thoughts from you
And
guys?
I might have missed the question there, but where my mind went was, if you're going to have to be in an extroverted environment surrounded by people like that, like, you might need to really make sure your batteries are charged with time and space for you as an introvert before you go to that, because so that you're not starting from a really low point. So, but what do you do when you're in that environment? I'll let y'all address that.
Libby, our introverted friend.
Yes.
You're a lone introvert, please.
So, I mean, I'm just relating to this person and thinking like I'm spending my day all day, with 4 children, and my husband's working from home now. And then, between small group and friend groups and things like that, there's a lot of evenings with, Zoom meetups or cocktail hours or things like that. And there are some nights when I have to make myself get on those Zoom meetings.
Not tonight, but those.
No, not tonight, never, no. But once I'm there, it's usually a life-giving experience, and I usually walk away encouraged or filled up in some capacity. But I'm quickly realizing that there are times I'm going to need to say no, for the sake of my well-being and for the well-being of the people who have to live with me every day.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to say no to other people sometimes. So I think, like Nate was saying, you are now in charge of carving out that space. And I realize that's probably going to be really difficult with work and other expectations. So the time that you do have control over and that you can say no with will be important to evaluate, and, one day at a time. And to let people know, like, look, I'm planning to be on that call and to catch up with you guys later, but I can't guarantee it. And to give yourself that freedom and that liberty to make the call, at the game time decision or whatever it is, that you may not be able to do it then.
Yeah, life is tough for the introverts. I got to be honest. It just sounds rough. I know there's some great book that came out. Anyway, that's not the topic right tonight. So let me hit this. I think this is a fascinating question, and I think this could maybe kind of where we can close out. It says, I'm loving every minute of this time at home without schedule or busyness in certain ways. But my concern is appropriate reentry at some point. How do we prepare for that? And I think there's more and more of that in the air of, at some point here, there's going to be the doors are going to open, we're going to be allowed out, and life is going to return to something. How do we prepare? What's some things that maybe, since none of us have ever done this before, that might be worth considering as we re-enter, as we prepare to re-enter? Any thoughts on that? just perspective wise.
Yeah, I mean, there's for all of us. I think there's going to be a sense of grief, even for people that are extreme extroverts wanting to, claw their skin off. Right, at some point, we're going to look at this and say, "Oh wow!" Like, and for me personally, who is not tends to struggle in this space, I'm slowing myself down to see what is a gift, that is going to go away. And within the context of reentry, I know the person that wrote that question, I'm loving every minute of it. Of course, they're going to have some significant grief. You get back to carpools, and you get back to whatever, the hustle and bustle of it,
Yeah.
and it's going to be very, very similar to some of the stuff that we're talking about in terms of the strategies of allowing yourself to not be okay with it, and connecting with someone else about it. Because like we talked about, the withness is just so incredibly important right now, that we're not alone and it will be a very disorienting space, because I feel like a large portion of the world is going to be so immediately excited, but then there's, I think, going to be a lull of like, oh wow, this is back to life that feels sad, and I don't know why does it feel sad, why, and I think that we need to give ourselves grace and be, as you said before, Libby, be gentle with ourselves enough to let ourselves respond in ways that may surprise us when we re-enter.
And I think there's also a temptation to want to like go back to normal. And so if I were to go back to normal this summer, let's say everything was lifted this summer, that would mean we would jump back into swim team 5 days a week. My sons would be going to summer camps. Like, it would be a really big adjustment for my kids, a huge adjustment for them. It would be way too big of an expectation to say, we're going back to normal. It would not be a realistic expectation to assume that they could do that and do that easily or well, or without lots of tantrums and breakdowns and meltdowns. So I've thought, if by chance we get to do swim team this year, we're not going to go at a 100% pace. We might start by going once or twice a week and ease back into things. And like Kendall said, lots of relational checking in, like, how are you guys feeling about this now that we're out of the house again and you're getting to see friends again and we're busy and in the car a lot again? How does that feel? Do you feel tired today? I would just look out, like, we all feel tired from the change now. We're going to feel tired from the change then. And so, like Kendall said, again, give lots of grace and lots of gentleness to yourself and others as you go through change together.
Yeah, within the context of marriage, I think you're pushing me to a place of thinking about, like, I think if you tend to leave, I think one spouse will tend to leave the other one behind if we're not careful doing check-ins like that, right? Because one spouse is likely, like, if you see it any marriage right now, somebody's responding and someone's more worried than the other, right? And the other one's, there's that dynamic. The same thing is going to happen when we leave. One person's going to be more ready to get back to life, and the other person's going to have more grief. And this consistent check-in, which I really do recommend to all couples, including myself, a consistent daily, how are you doing? Where's your anxiety level at? How are you feeling about where the uncertainty, whatever. The same thing, I think, needs to happen upon reentry. Let's keep that as a ritual of checking in, because I think we run a risk of leaving a spouse behind alone in their grief if we're not careful.
Mm-hmm.
Which would be true, I guess, for friendship or anything. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, and it'd be really cool to have a conversation with your spouse, with your kids, with your parents, if they're living in the house with you. Like, when we get to the point where more normal life is going to resume, to talk about, like, hey, what were some things that each of you really liked, that was really cool and different about this, and what are some ways, like, we can't stay in this. I don't think anybody really wants to stay in this exactly long run, but are there ways that a version of these things that were really good can be preserved, and what might that look like? Because no matter what, even even a wartime thing. Like, you know, I wasn't alive during World War II, but like there was a lot of really hard things about it. But I am sure that even in the midst of that, there were some new, different, beautiful things that when that was over were sad, or even realizations of like, you know what, I never realized, you know, that's what's the thing, like that's everything I never knew I always wanted until I experienced it. So that needs to have a place in normal life. And I can imagine each kid, each spouse having some aspect of that.
And just real practically speaking, we aren't great about doing it every night, but at least a few times a week around the dinner table, we have a high-low conversation, and everybody gets to go around the table and talk about what was the high point in their day, what was the low point in the day. And, you know, a lot of times it's silly things for the kids, but every now and then it creates a space for someone to say something that's hard, or to say something that they really need us to celebrate with them. So some nights it may feel like you're going through the motions, but those nights are making room for other nights when something meaningful will happen.
Really great, guys. Boy, I tell you, this time flew by. There are several other questions still that are kind of remaining out there. We'll potentially figure out a way to take those questions and maybe do some short answer to some of those. Just as a kind of thing, like if someone's like not doing well, like what's your recommendation? What would you guide them to if they're like really depressed, really isolated, like they're in a not good place right now? Here's a step to take.
You know, one tool that Libby and I were talking about earlier before we started the call is the Beck Depression Inventory, BECK. You can Google that. It's a very basic assessment of, is this kind of the normal fluctuations of life and mood? Is it mild depression? Is it moderate, or is it severe depression? And it can be really hard to assess that even in another person. It's almost impossible to assess that in ourselves. So if you're concerned and you're wondering about yourself or about one of your children or your spouse, like, I would look that up. If there's a way we can post it, I can share it on there. But it's just a way to get a sense of like, are things getting critical enough that we need to take some very tangible steps in the very near future to address a neurochemical spiral that could be really destructive. So the Beck Depression Inventory, I think, is just a good, very trusted in the mental health and medical community. It's been tried and true for a long time. It's not a deep, comprehensive assessment of mood, but it's a good one.
Good starting point. Yeah, cool.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if you're having any suicidal thoughts, if you are if you're just not functioning, if you are paralyzed, it's time to reach out to a professional. Everybody's doing telemental health these days, pretty much. So you can find someone online very easily. In addition, there's a great resource called the Georgia Crisis and Access Line. That is a 24-hour number you can call with lots of mental health resources. They can walk you through different options that you have. And I can give you that number real quick. It's 1-800-715-4225.
All right. Well, Nate, Libby, Kendall, thank you. There was, anytime we go on the inside of what's going on inside our hearts, minds, emotions, it's a labyrinth, and never like this time. So thank you for helping us just trying to navigate that as best we can. I'm sure if there's questions that are directed to you guys, we'll make sure that they come to you. And I know you guys have been fantastic about trying to encourage and help people along the way. So thanks for your time. Those who came as attendees, thanks for participating. And those watching online, if you have questions, feel free to post them underneath. We'll try to continue the conversation as as is helpful. So stay healthy, stay well, and we look forward to being together in a different kind of context. So thanks again, all three of you guys. Have a good night.
Thanks,
Good
Nick.
night.
Good night.